Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. This channel's for educational purposes, and we look at all kinds of different topics. This particular video is called Bible Decode, number 549, and we look at little known aspects of the Bible as well as perspectives and contexts that you won't normally get into a conversation with your priest, pastor, or pope or rabbi or minister, or even your family. These are considerations that are generally not made. And among those is the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the true authors of the New Testament were the Roman Caesars of the Flavian dynasty in the late 1st century, which they wrote as a psychological operation against the Jews. The Jews had become a huge pain in the side of the Romans for over 125 years. The Romans and Jews had been battling it out. An insurrection here, a revolt there, a war here, and an uprising there. The long and the short of it was that the Romans were tired of it. And the Romans decided that they were going to try to neutralize, tame, domesticate, or otherwise get the Jews to get with the program of, blending into the empire. And the Jews traditionally and through prophecy were literally expecting a savior, a Jewish savior, to come and deliver the Jews from the Romans. Any day now it was coming. And the Romans instead took advantage of that fact and wrote about Jesus, a Jewish savior. But instead of being a military commander for the Jews, he was a prince of peace. And he believed in rendering unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and walking the extra mile with the Roman soldiers' heavy backpack, turning the other cheek to oppression, while at the same time kind of diffusing all of the Jews' sticking points for the Romans, their insistence upon all of their traditions and rituals, the Passover ritual, the circumcision, the kosher food laws, the cleanliness laws, the observance of the Sabbath. These were all, and the stricture against graven images. These were all things that there are episodes of Jesus kind of flaunting or flouting in the New Testament, where he kind of tries to poke holes in those rules, or tries to make them not apply, because the Romans were proposing a Jesus who was going to make his religion a more inclusive religion, one that could include Gentiles who are not going to want to get circumcised, who are not going to want to observe these food laws, and so on. And so another twist for the Romans was that this new Jewish Messiah was going to be a son of God. That would not have happened under the Jews, who were waiting on a human being. But this Son of God is reflective of the Romans' paganism. This is the theme, the motif, the cookie cutter pattern for the pagan mythologies going back thousands of years. Krishna, Attis, Adonis, Hercules, Socrates, Confucius, Buddha, Osiris, um, Zoroaster. All of these characters fit the pagan model of a son of God coming down, performing miracles, healing, and imparting wisdom, and then being unjustly accused and martyred, and then going back up to heaven. And then there's a number of other tropes or motifs within that whole cycle of the life of a son of God, but you probably get the general idea. So this was a Jesus who was tailor-made to what the Romans wanted, and exactly what the Romans would and had done. The Romans had created a bunch of other religions in the first century. The Romans had the means, method, opportunity. Their method of psychological operations was right down their alley. That's what they did about everything. They were huge into entertainment with ridicule and satire and uh, body humor, as well as codes and enigmas and esotericism. This is all in the Gospels, often not recognized as such, because Christians generally, and even theologians, generally don't know these patterns. They don't know how to break the code. And that starts with the work of Josephus, who was a Jewish military commander who surrendered to General Vespasian of the Romans, and then eventually defected to the Romans and became one of the Roman court historians who wrote a history of the war between the Romans and the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. And this document, this history called War of the Jews, needs to be read alongside a reading of the Gospels to look for patterns, look for commonalities, look for parallels, look for parables. And you find them in spades, to the point where you can't really mark it up to any type of coincidence. How many coincidences does it take before it is mathematically impossible? And that characterizes a lot of the work that has been done by scholars writing about the Roman origins hypothesis. Several of them that I know of, try to demonstrate the statistics of, how many parallels or coincidences that they have dug up. And they're just like, this can't be any type of coincidence. It's very similar to the 17th letter, but going way beyond. If you are sold by the 17th letter and the statistical anomalies involved in the Q post, this is way beyond that. Galaxies beyond it, because there are so many different parallels and coming from all over the place and in just a very small amount of space. If you look at the book of Luke, Michael Menescotts has found over 250 parallels between Josephus and the book of Luke, arranged in a pattern, by the way. That's over 10 per chapter. So there are parallels literally saturating the book of Luke. And those are the only the ones that he has found. I'm sure that the Romans are hiding a lot of them that, you have to be an insider to figure it out. And I'm sure there are hundreds more that haven't been found. And Michael Menescot's in his book Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult, he acknowledges that. He acknowledges that he's like, I'm sure there's a bunch of them that I haven't found. They will all still fit the pattern. And he did go into another work that did find a number of other parallels that he did not find, and the vast majority of them, if not all of them, did fit the pattern. So anyway, we are looking at another work on this parallel track here from James Valliant and C.W. Fahy called Creating Christ, How the Romans Invented Christianity. And we are talking about some of the work of Josephus and how it has been understood. Now, Josephus's War of the Jews came out in about 75 AD, right around the same time as the Gospels were being written. The Gospels were written in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and Josephus's more major work in 20 volumes called Jewish Antiquities, which is his take on the Old Testament, more or less, with some filling in some other stuff that's not in the Old Testament. That came out in the 90s. And so Christians focus on that work because in that work he does corroborate the existence of Jesus by a secular source, but the earliest on record, even though it was 60 years after the said events. But most Christians will tell you that Josephus corroborates is a non-Christian source for the, independent existence of Jesus. But when you recognize who Josephus actually was and that the Romans had this psychological operation going on, then that means nothing, especially since all of the early corroborators of the existence of Jesus, they were all Roman Caesars. They were all members of the imperial court of the Roman Caesars, if not emperors themselves, like Emperor Trajan. So this really requires kind of a drastic change in how we evaluate these ancient Roman historians' work. Is it really history or is it propaganda? Can we rely on Josephus for this particular piece of evidence when we can't rely on him at all for this particular piece? So now these authors are we'll just start up and see where we go here. The deep impact of Flavius Josephus's work on Christians, whether they made use of his testimonium or not, demonstrates how fundamentally sympathetic his work is to Christianity in general. Many less sympathetic texts from other authors of this period, such as Justus of Tiberias, did not survive in Christian libraries at all and are lost to history, if they ever existed even before that. And there's certainly a question in my mind whether Josephus even existed either, or whether he was just a group of people that worked for the Roman imperial court, or the whole body of the Roman imperial court, or what have you. Possibly the Piso family that were courtiers for the Roman, for the Flavians. Why would Origen, now he's one of the church fathers, who I have no doubt was also a Roman Caesar relative, but as all the church fathers were, but they don't know that. So why would Origen in the 3rd century be the very first Christian writer to make substantial use of Josephus? He may simply have studied Josephus because of his field of interest, which seemed to encompass themes closely related with the Bible, with the Old Testament and the Jews. And possibly because of Origen's own background and interests in history, as one scholar suggests. So why does Origen's work present a serious problem for the authenticity of Josephus's testimonial to Christ? The most important Christian philosopher before St. Augustine, Origen was a prolific writer and a well-read scholar in the 3rd century who appreciated the work of Hellenized Jews like Philo and Josephus. He also appreciated how much the work of Josephus could contribute to a deeper understanding of Christianity. The 2nd century pagan writer Celsus, the critic of Christianity who first reported the story that Jesus was the illegitimate child of a Roman soldier, is known only through Origen's critique of his work. For obvious reasons, Celsus's own writings were not preserved by Christians and don't exist today. We can never know how much we will never know because of such censorship. But in his critique of Celsus, contra Celsus, Origen makes use of Josephus to rebut Celsus's charges, writing, "I would like to say to Celsus, who represents the few as accepting somehow John as a Baptist who baptized Jesus, that the existence of John the Baptist baptizing for the remission of sins is related by one who lived no great length of time after John and Jesus. For in the 18th book of his Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus bears witness to John as having been a Baptist and as promising purification to those who underwent the rite." Now, this writer, although not believing in Jesus as the Christ, is seeking after the cause of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, whereas he ought to have said that the conspiracy against Jesus was the cause of these calamities befalling the people. Since they put to death Christ, who was a prophet, says nevertheless, being although against his will, not far from the truth, that these disasters happened to the Jews as a punishment for the death of James the Just, who was a brother of Jesus, called Christ. The Jews having put him to death, although he was a man most distinguished for his justice. Paul, a genuine disciple of Jesus, says that he regarded this James as a brother of the Lord, not so much on account of their relationship by blood or of their being brought up together, as because of his virtue and doctrine. If then he says that it was on account of James that the desolation of Jerusalem was made to overtake the Jews, how should it not be more in accordance with reason to say that it happened on account of the death of Jesus Christ? of whose divinity so many churches and witnesses composed of those who have been converted from a flood of sins, convened from a flood of sins, and who have joined themselves to the Creator, and who refer all their actions to his good pleasure. Okay, that's the end of that long quote. Origen accepts Josephus' self-identification as a Jew. Any assistance he provides Christians, therefore, according to Origen, is against his will, and even more compelling, therefore. The fact that Origen finds Josephus so compelling an authority is itself significant. Yet, writing in the 3rd century, Origen is explicit on this point. Josephus did not accept Jesus as the Christ, in direct contradiction of the Josephus text that we have inherited today. Eusebius, who wrote in the early 4th century, quotes the full testimonium with all the bells and whistles that we have today. However, so we know that the passage was tweaked sometime between Origen and Eusebius around the turn of the 4th century. Other things that bothered Origen about Josephus are very interesting. He decries Josephus's claim that the temple was destroyed on account of James's death rather than because of Jesus' death. Origen seems to be correcting Josephus on something that does not exist in any Josephus text that we possess today. So something else was changed. Origen elsewhere writes, the Jewish war began in the reign of Nero and lasted until the government of Vespasian, whose son Titus destroyed Jerusalem on account, as Josephus says, of James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. But in reality, as the truth makes clear, on account of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So here he is relating that Josephus justified the deeds of the Emperor Titus by way of the Jews' murder of James. This reference in Josephus does not survive at all now, but such a motive would make sense coming from Josephus, the Flavian apologist, to show that internal strife among Jews was responsible for the events that led to the destruction of their temple, certainly distracts from the Roman role in that deed, even if it falls short of a full justification for it. While the murder of a good man such as James might meet the case. In yet another work, Origen says, and James is he whom Paul says in the epistle to the Galatians that he saw, but other of the apostles saw I none, says James, the Lord's brother. And to so great a reputation among the people for righteousness did this James rise, that Flavius Josephus, who wrote the Antiquities of the Jews in 20 books, when wishing to exhibit the cause why the people suffered so great misfortunes that even the temple was razed to the ground, said that these things happened to them in accordance with the wrath of God in consequence of the things which they had dared to do against James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. And the wonderful thing is that though he did not accept Jesus as Christ, and yet gave testimony that the righteousness of James was so great, and he says that the people thought that they had suffered these things because of James. And Jude, who wrote a letter of few lines, it is true, but filled with the beautiful words of heavenly grace, said in the preface, Jude, the servant of Jesus Christ and the brother of James. Well, that's end of quote. Well, Origen is not only reporting for the third time that Josephus said the temple destruction was God's punishment for the murder of James, an assertion no longer found in Josephus's work, but here he adds that Josephus claimed the people understood this divine punishment was for the murder of James. So this was a widespread belief at the time. This seems to further elaborate what Origen was objecting to in the previous passage. If Origen is correctly reporting this Josephus passage, this too makes sense, as Josephus's passage about John the Baptist shows divine punishments for the murder of a good man were to be expected by both contemporary Jews and apparently Josephus himself. Okay, I think we're gonna stop right there, even though it might not be the best place. Now we're getting close to being done with this book, but I do, I feel like being done with it already because uh, I feel like they're splitting hairs here, and we're trying to pin down the actions of Josephus and what the church fathers had to say and who wrote what, when, where, and who was really involved in this Roman authorship. But as I said yesterday, I feel like much of that is a red herring, and that the really important thing that people have to grasp from this is that the Romans wrote the New Testament. Doesn't matter what Romans, it hardly matters when the Romans did it. And Josephus is the proof of it. Josephus's War of the Jews. Who knows if Josephus was a pseudonym, pen name, or whether it was a real person, or whether he was a whole operation. We don't know that. His autobiography is very fishy. It tells some stories that don't make sense. There's a lot of stuff in Josephus that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of stuff in the Gospels that don't make a lot of sense. But I think if you read the Gospels alongside Josephus, you will find patterns that exist that you cannot explain away. And for that reason, I feel like the truthers out there, the ones who are always trying to dig up false flags and conspiracies and hoaxes, amplified messaging, and so on, that they really do need to go down this rabbit hole to see for themselves. I'm not asking you to believe me, but I am asking you to take a look at it, because there's something there that needs to be, parsed and, explained away if you think that's possible. I just don't see any really explaining away of it. I see, maybe, I'm not saying that a person like Jesus never existed. It could be based on some information that they have about a different character who maybe lived at a different time at a different place, that they borrowed from. They borrowed from a bunch of people like that: Krishna and Confucius and Osiris and so on. But then I'm also not saying that God doesn't exist. That's not relevant here. This is all about Jesus and the Gospels. This doesn't have anything to do with the creation of the universe as it occurred in the Old Testament. We'll get to that, but I definitely wouldn't ever say that I don't believe in God, but maybe a little bit different than what maybe your average truther believes in, but definitely a higher power, um, that makes a purpose for the universe. Okay, like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and come back tomorrow for another episode of Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.